Hi, I'm Preston Williams, and welcome to another edition of Jazz Talk. Today on our show, we're joined by one of the most talented musicians on the jazz scene today. This gentleman has been around for over 35 years and has worked with many greats from Stephanie Mills to Lionel Hampton, Joe Henderson, Chick Corea, Billy Childs, so many. This guy's worked with everyone. Ron Carter, Buster Williams, Dave Holland, just everybody. He is a saxophonist, composer, and educator. Please welcome to Jazz Talk, Mr. Steve Wilson. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Preston. Thanks for inviting me, man. Great to be with you. Thanks so
Man,
much.
it's great. It's so great to have you. Steve, I've been checking you out for a while, man. You've been on as I said, the music scene for quite a while. You play with so many different great artists. And I'm interested in knowing more about your humble beginnings. I understand that you're from Hampton, Virginia.
That's right. Yeah.
HBCU.
That's right.
That's actually the #1 HBCU school right now. I was doing some research because I got a daughter that may be going to college in a year or so. But man, I'm interested to know about your humble beginnings, how this all started. And I was interested when I was digging in your background. Man, you're like a multi-instrumentalist. You play flute, you play clarinet, you play drums coming up. Tell me about how you got involved in music, how this all started.
Well, actually, part of that upbringing was at then Hampton Institute, which is now Hampton University.
Mm-hmm.
But starting in 1968, they had a jazz festival, which was produced by George Wein. And, of course, he had Newport going for many years and other things he was doing. So he started branching out. And one of the places he did this was at Hampton Institute. So starting in the summer of 68, my father took me to the jazz festival just about every year. So I got to see some incredible artists. I mean, even before I really knew what it was, but I got to see everyone from Freddie Hubbard to Rahsaan Roland Kirk to Sly and the Family Stone to Sarah Vaughan. I mean, man, the list goes on and on. Cannonball Adderley, Stanley Turrentine. So it was really amazing to go to that. And really, that's what started my desire to play music. And my father had a small but very eclectic record collection.
Mm.
And so the first two records that really made an impact on me to want to play music was Swiss Movement, Eddie Harris and Les McCann, and Cannonball Adderley, Country Preacher. And I used to listen to those records every day. So I started going out buying some records with my allowance even before I could, started taking music lessons. So, so that's really where it all started.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So anyone in your family, any musicians in the family other than yourself?
Well, in my immediate family, it was just my sister and I, my mom and dad. But my dad sang in a spiritual choir. They sang it was an all-male choir called the Crusaders. And they used to give a lot of concerts at Hampton Institute and all throughout Virginia and the Carolinas. And I used to travel with them sometimes, just Saturday or Sunday trips to their concerts. And I have a few cousins that played instruments, but everybody in my neighborhood in those days, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, everybody in my neighborhood played music. So what we did all day was play sports and music. So one of my good friends down the street, who was a couple of years older than I was, he actually gave my first saxophone lesson. And I said, well, this is what I really want to do. So starting in 7th grade, I started taking lessons at school and went on from there. But so I had some scattered family members who were musicians and artists. We do have a history of that in our family on both sides of my family. So there's a connection there.
So during your teenage years, you were playing in local bands, playing some funk, R&B, that type of thing. So was it more or less just local musicians or friend of yours, you guys would get together and gig?
Yeah, both, all of that. Well, of course, during the day at school, it would be like the concert band, a symphonic band, marching band, jazz band. And then during the weeknights and weekends, we started putting garage bands together. So we had a couple of really nice neighbors who would let us use their garages to rehearse. And we would play like school dances or Elks Lodges on the weekends. I mean, we were teenagers doing this, but we loved it. So we were playing, all the stuff of the day, Kool and the Gang, Parliament Funkadelic, Ohio Players, all of that stuff, Earth, Wind and Fire. And then I started hooking up with older musicians. When I first started going out to sit in the jazz jam sessions in my late teens, I encountered some of the elder statesmen who were around. And there was one guy his name was Joe Jones, but we called him Virginia Joe Jones. He was a piano player.
Mhm.
And he actually played for Dizzy with Dizzy for a minute in the 50s. But he was one of those classic old school piano players who knew any tune and every key, would play with the cigarette hanging outside of his mouth, all night, you know, and a few of the guys that played with him. And also, I should mention a guy named Everett Holland, who used to play with Billy Harper
Okay.
in the 70s. And Everett was a great trumpet player, and he had moved back to Hampton. So he started mentoring me, and he introduced me to Billy Harper's music and a few other guys around. And we had the Little Creek School of Music in Norfolk, Virginia Beach. And that was a renowned school of music. A lot of great musicians came out of that school. And they had a lot of great jazz players. So we would, right across the other side of the water and sit in with them and do gigs, jam sessions. So it was a great time to be growing up there. And I should mention also, um, around that time, I befriended the great Billy Drummond, wonderful, fantastic drummer, one of the best drummers on the planet. And we became good friends. And he lived around the corner from the Wooten brothers.
Yeah.
So,
and I was about to ask you about that because the other night we were talking, I didn't know that you have a history with Victor. The whole family. And Victor was like, yeah, he says, Steve knows my brothers. And I'm like, wow. I guess because
right.
you guys grew up similarly and you guys weren't that far from each other, I guess.
No, about 10 miles, maybe, but basically it was the same, that kind of radius is the same neighborhood, really.
Yeah, yeah.
So spent a lot of time there jamming and talking because those guys were so brilliant even then, so talented and really trying to dig deep into all the music. So it was a fantastic time to be growing up at that time.
One of the things that I found interesting, Steve, how did you get the gig and hook up with Stephanie Mills at such a young age, man? You played with her for like a year. I was like, wow. I said, Steve had it going at, such a young age. I guess this is before you went to college, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, I went to college for a year and then I got the call for Stephanie. And that came by way of another childhood friend, Alvin Moody, in Hampton. And Alvin had gotten a gig with Stephanie, moved to New York. And the following year, they were looking for horn players. So he called me and said, hey, man, would you want to try to check out this gig? So they flew me up there, auditioned for the gig. So I took a year off from college to do that gig. So that was another Hampton connection also. And one more thing. So when I showed up to the rehearsal, who was on keyboards, but my student teacher, he was going to Hampton Institute at the time, but he was my student teacher my senior year in high school. So I was probably like the last guy he expected to see to show up. And I was like, hey, wait, hey, so it was a big Hampton connection on that gig.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And then when you go to school, man, I was blown away with the people that you studied with. I'm like John Hicks, Jimmy and Percy Heath, John Hendricks. I saw all these names. I'm like, wow. I mean, to get first-hand training from those guys and work with them, and what was that like?
Well, when I went to Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond,
Yeah.
they had they were just starting what became one of an amazing jazz program. My first semester there, Elvin Jones' Jazz Machine came with Andrew White and Ari Brown.
Oh my gosh.
And then from that point on, every year we brought in artists in residence. So we brought in the Heath brothers, Frank Foster, Jackie Byard, Benny Carter, Betty Carter, Woody Shaw. I mean, it was just an amazing parade of great musicians that came through. And they would typically come in for a week and we would play their music. They would hang with us, we'd hang with them. So again, it was just a really fertile environment to be in at that time. And we were all working around town. All of the young musicians were working around town. And towards the end of my time at school, Ellis Marcellus came.
Yeah.
They got him as an artist in residence there for a couple of years. So I started working with him just before my move to New York.
That's incredible, man. Working with those type of artists early in your career. I mean, it must have been a game changer for you. Like, just Woody Shaw and Elvin Jones. I mean, what can you say about that? So you moved to New York, and I guess what was that mid 80s or something like that?
Yeah, 87.
And didn't you play with the Mingus Big Band? You also played with Lionel Hampton too, man. That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah. Well, my move to New York was facilitated by meeting Kenny Garrett.
Mm,
And Kenny at the time, this is around 85, 86. Kenny was, or maybe 84, but Kenny was playing this Broadway show, Sophisticated Ladies,
hmm.
which of course featured Phyllis Hyman in the
Right.
lead role. And so he was in a touring company. So they called me as one of the locals to fill out the section. So that's where I met Kenny, and
Wow.
we stayed in touch. And so he had joined the band OTB Out of the Blue, which was a Young Lions group on Blue Note Records in '86, I believe.
Hmm.
And he started transitioning to Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. So he called me to sub on some gigs with OTB, and that's where I met all of those guys. And I have to stop here for a moment and give a special salute to one of the charter members of that band who just passed away a few days ago, my dear friend and brother, Ralph Peterson Jr.
Oh, yeah, Ralph. Yeah, man.
And
And it's funny. I was in the process of doing an interview with him. His management was setting it up early January, Steve. And she says, Preston, I'm
wow.
sorry, he's in hospice now. We were kind of getting it together, but yeah, what a great musician, a great drummer. God rest his
Yes,
soul, man. Yeah.
absolutely. And so with Ralph's encouragement and the rest of the guys, I moved to New York and joined the band in '87, and that's from there on. I started working with Lionel Hampton after I moved there. I started
Mm.
subbing with the Vanguard. Well, it was still the Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra at that point, but I started subbing in that band. The American Jazz Orchestra, which is a repertory orchestra led by John Lewis, the great John Lewis from Modern Jazz Quartet, and Gary Gittens, the great jazz writer,
Mm.
and the Mingus Band, and from then on, a lot of other folks. So that's kind of, my transition into New York.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, like I said, so many musicians, man. I was also interested. You also work with one of my favorite tenor players, Joe Henderson. What was it like working with Joe, man?
That man, that was a ball. Well, my first time playing with him actually was just before I moved to New York. I was still living in Richmond, and a good friend of mine and drummer Jay Sinnott in Norfolk, Virginia Beach. Jay would bring in a lot of guest artists with the local rhythm section, and so when he brought in Joe, he said, "Hey, man, why don't you come in and sit in with the band?" And so that's where I first met Joe. And then a few years later, after my move to New York, Rini Rosnes,
Mm.
great pianist and composer, and we had become friends through. She also played in Out of the Blue a little later, and I think it was her second or third record date for Blue Note.
Mm.
And she called me to play on that record, and that's where I got to play with Joe on the front line of the record. And we did one or two live dates when the record came out. So, and then later on, I got to play with him again some years later when they did the Joe Henderson Big Band
Yeah, I
on
believe that
Verve.
was on Verve. Yeah, I remember.
Yes,
I think I have that downstairs.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And Joe was one of my main influences and idols, man. I loved his music, loved his playing, and he was kind of a funny guy because he didn't really talk a lot, but he could be engaging at the same time. And a little quick Joe Henderson story. This is after the first record date I'd done with Rini. I think it was like maybe 1990, 91, something like that. And so somewhere around 93, I'm just sitting at home and the phone rings, and I pick it up, you know, hey, Steve. Yeah. Yeah, this is Steve. Yeah, hey, this is Joe Henderson. Joe Henderson. Wow. Yeah, man. Hey, look, man. I'm stuck here in Minneapolis airport, and and I'm thinking, man, how did this guy get my number? Because we had never exchanged. I was like, how did
Right,
Joe
right.
get my number? So hey, man, look, I lost Rini's number, and I need to contact Rini. So I gave him the number, and then we just started chatting about just some everyday stuff. He says, well, look, man, I got to run. Great talking to you. And I just thought, that's crazy, man. How did Joe get my number? To this day, I have no idea. So,
Wow.
um, but later on, when he came to town and we did the record date, and we took a cab up to Midtown together to his hotel, and we were just talking about regular stuff. He was talking about a son that he had in the New York area, and just regular kind of stuff. So but it was great to play with him, and I mean, just everything you would admire about his playing, and then some, was right there when you played beside him. It was a great honor.
He's definitely one of the giants, man, on the tenor, without question.
Yeah.
You also played with one of my favorite musicians, bassist Dave Holland, in his
Yes.
group. And Dave, what can you say about him? I mean, just incredible. Now, during that time when you played with him briefly, was Robin Eubanks and those guys in the group at the time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the band, um, well, Dave was he was kind of in between because he was doing, I think he had a quartet at one point
Hmm.
with Eric Person and I think Steve Nelson. And then he was doing an all-star thing with Herbie. Um, and so he called me. This was around '96, I think. So he called me to ask if I would join his quintet, and I was amazed that he called me. Because he of course had a parade of such great musicians and great saxophonists in the band. So I joined the quintet, which had Robin Eubanks and Steve Nelson and Billy Kilson.
Mm.
And so I stayed with that band for about a year and change. We toured a few times, and it was just an incredible experience, man. Those All of those guys were just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Every night was a learning experience, and Dave was just stretching every night. The band was just stretching, man. And we had a ball. And he's one of the most beautiful human beings on the planet, man. He just really became a mentor and a dear friend. And and we did I was honored enough to do a recording with him. I think it was called uh I can't remember the name of the album right now, so I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I probably have it downstairs. I have most of Dave's stuff in that those groups that he had during that time, the mid 80s, even 90s. And I think Steve Coleman even played with him for a while too.
Yeah, well, that's where I first became aware of Dave, actually, in the early '80s, and the bands he had with Smitty Smith and
Right.
Steve Coleman and Kenny Wheeler. Man, these guys are killing it,
Yeah.
and because they were breaking new ground, So I just thought, man, maybe one day I'll get to play with them. But you think that, but you never think it'll come to fruition. But it did. So I'm very happy about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just going to ask you, Steve, what is it like playing accompanying behind like a vocalist? Of course, you've played with the great Diane Reeves, one of my favorites. What is it like working with a singer or playing with a vocalist? I mean, is it different than just being in a regular quintet or quartet when you're, working with a singer? Tell me about that.
Yeah, for the most part, it is, and I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of amazing vocalists
Yeah.
throughout the years, even before I got to New York. But Diane Reeves among them, just a little bit of work with her, mainly through recording. But Renee Marie, we've worked together a few times.
Yes.
Karen Allison, and let's see, oh boy, so many of them. But I love working with vocalists because working with the vocalists, it keeps you very honest. You have to really pick your spots in terms of playing and really pay deference to the lyric, to the story. So
Mm.
you have to find your place in that story. So, and I loved it, especially being a solo horn, because it allowed me to think more as sort of like an arranger or orchestrator.
Yeah.
Like what would a string line be here? What would a flute line might be here? Or perhaps a guitar line? What would just be the right thing? So it wasn't just about trying to fill in all the space. It was trying to, number one, stay out of the way and trying to play, a little bit more reserved and picking your spots, unless they gave you license to do more. But I enjoyed that because, you learn to play in all of the different keys, because they're always doing tunes and, you're used to doing a tune in C and of course they're going to do it in F sharp. So it's like, okay, so you're going to have to learn these tunes in different keys. Um, and then also they usually have some set arrangements, so you have to find your way in the arrangements. Sometimes they don't have a particular horn line they want you to do, so you have to pick out what you can do in that arrangement, so you're forced to use your ear. And so I had other examples that I would draw on from that, people that I had listened to. And you spoke of Gary Bartz, who's one of my heroes, and
Mhm.
and those records that I used to listen to a lot of Gary Bartz on those Blue Note records, the things he did with Donald Byrd stuff. And
Play
of
with
course,
McCoy Tyner too.
McCoy Tyner, right.
Yeah.
And of course, the recordings she did with Phyllis Hyman.
Mm.
So that was kind of my model for the obligato style of playing, because
Mhm.
Gary would just wait for the right moment and it would just be the most profound thing you could hear. So that was one of my models of doing that. But others too, just various recordings that, that you hear throughout the years. But I love working with singers, man, because it helps you get to the lyrical side, and it also helps you to conceive of melody much more and think melody all the time. So it's really helped my development.
Yeah, and Steve, you've also worked with some of the greatest pianists, man. A few of them who are not with us anymore. Talking about James Williams, of course, Mulgrew Miller, Billy Childs, all those guys. Let me ask you a question. Playing with so many great pianists like that, what are some of the differences? Working with someone like James Williams and Billy Childs. Because like I said, they're all fantastic musicians in their own right. And but what are some of the differences playing with all those great pianists?
Well, first of all, all of those guys, just as in terms, they're all of the guys you just mentioned, and there are more, of course, but they were pure piano players. I mean, what I mean by that, they could just sit down at the instrument without warming up, and just the first thing they play, they're already into the zone, you know. So working with James and Mulgrew particularly was such a history lesson
Hmm.
because those guys knew so much of the history of the piano and of music. So I really learned about the great lineage of pianists
Yeah,
and the music. And of course, James being from Memphis and Mulgrew was a very close friend of James, because they were part of that, what I call the Memphis Mafia. I said that lovingly.
yeah.
Of course, stemming from the lineage of Phineas Newborn
Mm.
and George Coleman and Harold Mayburn, who also got to play with and know very well, and Frank Strozier and George Coleman, Bill Easley. I mean, man, the list goes on and on. That Memphis crew
Incredible.
that's a mean crew, man.
Yes, it is. Yes, it sure is, man.
And so going to playing with any of those guys, they're going to take you to school. So playing with Mulgrew and James particularly, uh, you're just getting the music lesson, number one, and number two, they were princes among men. They were the
Mm.
most giving human beings. They would. I saw them give so much to so many. They would help to nurture young musicians, give opportunity to young musicians. They come out when they weren't playing. They would come out and see your band or see you play with someone else. It was typical of James that he would be on tour and say he come home from Europe. He would come, if you were working at the Vanguard, he would come straight from the airport,
Oh, wow.
on a Sunday night. He'd come straight from the airport to see you play and just hang. So that kind of love, man, you can't, you can't say enough about it. That kind of love and support. So you're just getting so much more along with the music lesson.
Yeah. And you also work with George Duke too, man. What was it like working with
Oh,
George?
oh man. Now that was a dream come true because like probably like 99% of us who were around in the 60s and 70s and 80s,
Right.
I was a Dookie fan, with all of those records, The Order
Right.
Will Prevail and,
Right.
all of those records in the 80s he did. The 70s stuff was amazing though, the
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
on MPS, but his whole body of work. So my first opportunity to work with him was through the Diane Reeves recording, The Calling,
Mm.
and which he was producing, and Billy Childs was the arranger on that record,
Right.
and both he and Mulgrew played piano on that record, as a matter of fact.
Hmm.
So they flew me out to L.A. and George was in the booth, and so I got to meet him, and he was such another gracious human being, and he just made you feel so comfortable. Because I have to be honest, I was really nervous, man, because
Yeah.
Billy Childs thought enough of me to. He said, "Man, I really would love for you to come in and solo on a couple of tunes." And then when I got there, he says, "Look, I want you to play on two or three more things. I wrote a few more arrangements, so you're here. Let's just have you play on more stuff." I thought, "Oh wow!" So I'm in the booth, and the whole orchestra is there, the whole band is there, Diane, and George was one of my heroes, and Diane, who I just loved and adored and admired as a musician,
Hmm.
and she was so great. And of course, Billy's arrangements, and I think, man, I'm pinching myself, and then I'm thinking like, okay, don't screw this up, Wilson, don't screw this up, But I had such a great time, man. And then about a year and a half later, I was in LA with Buster Williams playing at not Catalina's, at the Jazz Bakery. And so I'm in my hotel room and I get a call, and it was George Duke's assistant. And she says, "Hey, Steve, this," I can't remember her name. She says, "Hey, look, George found out you're in town and he'd love for you to come by and cut, do a couple of things on Diane's record. But she's doing a new record." I thought, wow. So the next day they picked me up from the hotel, went over to his house. We had a studio. Diane was there, and I did a couple overdubs, and we had such a beautiful hang. And then he called me again a little while later to play one or two tunes on one of his albums, and he flew me out to LA, and so just getting to hang with him for a bit and to know him, and again, his body of work encompasses the whole thing, man. So you think
Oh,
of the
yeah.
work he did with Cannonball,
Yeah.
you think of the work he did with Frank Zappa,
Right.
all that stuff on MPS he did, and then later on Stanley Clark. And I saw them live when I was a teenager, by the way,
Mm.
in Hampton at one of the festivals. The band with Billy Cobham, another hero,
Yeah. Schofield and
Schofield and
Alfonso Johnson.
Alfonso. Man,
Yeah.
and I remember sitting right behind Billy Cobham, watching all the drums and Duke with all the keyboards, and I was like, so
Incredible.
like everybody else I was just a huge fan. So just getting to play with him and know him a bit was just a dream come true.
Yeah. We're talking about pianists. And when you think about piano players of the last 60 years, first person that comes to mind is McCoy Tyner, Herbie Hancock. And then there's another name that I want to mention. We just lost this brilliant icon, Chick Corea, who you
Yeah.
have the opportunity to work with. You shared some wonderful stories about Chick the other night. And like I said, it's a big loss to the jazz world. But how did you get the gig, man, to work with Chick Corea?
Well, that too is a pretty incredible story. I was working with Abishai Cohen, the bassist, Abishai Cohen, around 96, 97.
Okay.
So Abishai called and says, "Hey, man, I just signed on with Chick Corea's record label, and we're going to be doing a record date, and Chick's going to come in and produce." I went, "Oh, man, that's great." So I was still working with Dave's band at the time also, but um, so we did the record date here in New York City, and Chick was there, the whole time, and he was just really nice and relaxed, and just pretty much stayed out of the way. He just kind of let us do our thing. He would give some pointers here or there, but he loved everything we're doing. And after the date, he said, "Man, it was so great to meet you and hear you, and I'll be in touch at some point, man. And hopefully we can do something somewhere down the road." I just thought, okay, great. And of course, I'm leaving there thinking, well, that would probably never happen. But you know what?
Right.
Just this experience, man, I'm beautiful. I'm humbled. So about a year and change later, um, Chick called out of the blue and said, "Hey, Steve, it's Chick." I'm like, wow, she said, "Hey, look, man, I'm writing some new music for a sextet, and I just want to see how it sounds. So it's just this kind of experiment. So I've sort of put this little rehearsal gig together in upstate New York in Schenectady, this club, the Van Dyke, and it's a 2 or 3 night engagement. I've put a few guys together. Just want to know if you'd be interested in doing it. I just want to see how this stuff sounds." Of course, I'm open. Yeah, I'm in.
Yeah.
So we gathered up there in the band with Bob Shepard and tenor, Steve Davis and trombone, Avishai on bass, Adam Cruz on drums, and Chick. So we did this 2 or 3 night engagement, and it was really incredible. I mean, the music was amazing, was fantastic. And so at the end of it, we thought, man, what a great experience. Chick, thank you so much for calling. So I remember the next day with my manager, Chick said, "Hey, look, before you guys leave town, come by the club and have lunch with us before you leave town." And I said, "Okay, why not?" So we went by and had a little chat, and it was Chick's manager there, and we're sitting chatting. And Chick says, "Well, look, man, I just letting you know that this is the new band. Um, I've already told my people to start booking." And I'm like, "What?" And I think we all had that, right? We're like, "What?" Like, really? And so that really presented a dilemma for me because I was working with Dave Holland's band, and
Yeah.
I was having just the time of my life, and I was thinking, and so I said, well, Chick, I'm working with Dave Holland. Is it going to be possible to juggle the two? She says, well, I don't know because we're booking a lot of stuff. And I went, oh, she says, yeah, man, we're going to be really, hauling it. And so I thought, oh no. So for 3 weeks I sat at home and I just didn't know what to do.
Right.
I was just torn, man, because I love Dave so much, and I didn't want to leave the band, but ultimately I decided to join Chick's band, and I said, well, I don't want to look back and say what if,
Right.
but I hated leaving Dave, man. So it took me 3 weeks to make that decision and call him. It's probably the hardest decision I've ever had to
I
make,
would say so. Wow.
not just in my career, but probably my entire life. So I made the call to Dave, and he was so gracious and beautiful. He said, "Man, congratulations. These things happen, so good luck with it, and man, loved having you. And look, hopefully we can work together down the road." So
Beautiful.
that just speaks to his humility and just his humanity. And of course, the rest is history because Chris Potter joined the band, and man,
Yes.
they took off and made some serious history. And I went and saw that band many times, and it was just on fire, man. So, um, but I had a great time working with Chick in Origin for the next 3 years. We had a
Yeah.
beautiful time. We made
Stuff.
a lot of great music, great recordings, and a few changes in the band that happened with, of course, Jeff Ballard came in the band, and then Tim Garland came in the band on tenor. But we had a beautiful time. It was just a beautiful experience.
I mean, just the stories that you were sharing the other night about this man, he was like the walking embodiment of music. How you would just talk about after a gig, this man would shed some more, had a piano in his room, and it's like you guys are spent, exhausted, and Chick is still practicing hours and hours later. And you're like, how is this guy doing this? Where's this energy coming from?
Yeah,
And just amazing. I mean,
yeah,
60 years, like you said, 5-6 decades of work. I mean, he was special, and he's definitely going to be missed. Now, I
yes.
wanted to ask you, or rather tell you, first time I saw you was when you were with that group, Buster Williams, something more. I said,
Yes.
man, that's my man, Steve Wilson. And I believe it was you, Lenny, and Patrice Rushen. And you may not remember, but you guys were in Bethesda Blues and Jazz Supper Club. This is back in 2014,
I do
November
remember.
2014. And
I do remember.
I was chatting with you a little bit. I said, Steve, where's Patrice? He said, oh, yeah, she's in the back. But I just told you, I enjoyed your playing, man. That was a really, really nice set.
Thank you.
And that was great. I'll never forget that night. Now, something else I wanted to ask you about that I found very interesting, something you did about 15 years ago. You played for Queen Elizabeth and Prince
Well,
Philip in Virginia. Man, talk to me about that, man.
well, kind of, sort of. Well, she made a visit to America, and so I got a call from some of the people at I think it was the governor's office, but they were putting together a special performance in honor of their visit, and
Mm-hmm.
so it included a lot of different kinds of musicians from Virginia. And it was they had all kinds of musicians there. I think Ralph Stanley, of course, who, the great bluegrass musician, his band, he's legendary. He's one of the founding fathers of the art form. um and so some other, some R&B musicians. So they were putting together a whole extravaganza performance. And so what they told me, they said, yeah, this is going to be for the Queen. She's going to be visiting the Capitol in Richmond. And so my impression was that, well, this would be sort of a command performance. That's what I was thinking. I didn't find out till we got there that our stage was like, basically like a quarter of a mile from where the Queen was going to be. So it was actually not really even on the Capitol grounds. It was just sort of like maybe, like I said, about a quarter of a mile, but it was timed with her visit. So it was an honor of her visit. So we didn't actually have an audience with the Queen,
Okay.
but nonetheless, I was very honored. I had some friends that were on that panel that called, friends that I had known from Richmond, and they thought enough of me to be included. So I was honored nonetheless, man, just to be included in that. So
Yeah, that's beautiful.
it
It's
was,
beautiful.
yeah.
Now, I was going to ask you, you're also an educator, man. You've taught everywhere. all the schools that you've been associated with. Is that something that you enjoy doing, Steve? I mean, of course, you go out and you perform, but is teaching, I guess, giving back to students, is that something that you really love doing? Is that a passion for you?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I started teaching in the New York area in '91,
Mm-hmm.
and Rufus Reed, who's
Rufus.
become a dear friend and mentor over the years, and I've worked with him as well. But he thought enough of me to call me to come teach at William Patterson University in New Jersey. And at the time, Joe Lovano was just leaving because
Mm-hmm.
Joe's career was just about to take off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so he thought enough to call me and say, "Hey man, look, why don't you come give this a try and see how it works out?" So I ended up teaching there for about 6, 7 years. And then I got very busy, with Dave Holland and Chick and various other people going on the road. And then after I started touring less in around 2002 or three, I started teaching at the different schools in the area, the New School, City College, and then I started teaching at Juilliard,
Mm.
SUNY Purchase, and Manhattan School of Music. And so 8 years ago, uh, I did a guest artist series, one of the guest artist series at City College of New York, which is just up the street from Manhattan School of Music. And the following year, they asked me to apply for the full-time position that was opening there,
Mm-hmm.
because John Patitucci had been there before me and he was leaving.
Mm.
So I applied for the gig. Uh, I got into the list of finalists, and so I went up and did a presentation, and ended up getting the job. So
Mm.
I was very, very honored to get the job. So this is my eighth full year as a full-time professor
Beautiful.
there. And I enjoy working with students, man. I love mentoring students. I actually don't even think of myself as a teacher, really. I think of myself more as a coach and a mentor,
Mm.
to just try to point them in the right direction and try to pass on knowledge that's been given to me. But uh, but I love the mentoring part the most, because I just love to see where these young musicians are going to go with the skills they have and the passion they have. And then they start networking with each other. They go out in the world and they make things happen. They have a vision. They start working with some of the older musicians. So I just get a kick out of seeing what they're going to do. And I've had a lot of students, man, who have been successful over the years. I mean, collectively from all of the places that I've taught, and they've played with people like Count Basie, Beyonce,
Yeah.
Roy Hargrove,
Yeah.
Kenny Barron. I mean, the list has just been incredible. Uh, Jazz Lincoln Center. So it's just amazing to watch them go out in the world and just shake things up, and it's just beautiful.
Now, Steve, right now, are you like conducting courses or teaching like online because of COVID? Of course, a lot of people are teaching classes online. Is that what you're doing right now?
Yes, yeah, we've
Okay.
we've been all virtual since last spring.
That's great.
Uh, yeah, and as it did with everyone, it just kind of hit us in the middle of the semester, and we had to convert. We hope to be back in some in-person form in the fall. Of course, we just don't know yet. There's so many things at play, as you know, with the vaccinations and
Right.
just where we are at the time. So, um, but we've made it work as best we can in the virtual mode, and the main thing is we've been able to keep students on schedule to graduate and keep their education going. So,
Beautiful.
um, and this will probably be a part of the new paradigm going forward. So
I think so too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we're all still adjusting.
Hey, man, I wanted to play a game with you. And this is going to be like a word association game. There's no right or wrong answer, but just say the first thing that comes to your mind. I'm going to name some musicians, and whatever you want to say. First name, Charlie Parker.
Oh, the master,
Yeah.
the master, the game changer, the one who just changed the whole game and really, um, along with Louis Armstrong, but in terms of the modern language that we play from improvisationally, he's the one that took it to where we stand on those shoulders, man. So he's really the template of the modern language we use. He's still the template.
Next name, Coleman Hawkins.
The great tenor master, the template of great tenor playing,
Mhm.
period. And I, with all my saxophone students, they have to learn body and soul.
Yeah.
So that's it. And one of the founding fathers of bebop, because
Hmm.
he nurtured Thelonious Monk. So, and he doesn't get enough credit for that. So another grandmaster and shoulder that we stand on.
Next name, Prez, Lester Young.
Well, another one of the architects. Yeah, just someone who, again, had his own language musically and verbally, and still has such an impact on us. And on a parallel course with Coleman Hawkins, just really set the template of great tenor playing.
Yeah. Next name, Jackie McLean.
Jackknife, J Mac,
Yeah.
arguably the hardest swinging altoist that ever lived.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky to get to know Jackie a bit.
Mm.
A quick Jackie McLean story. Um, I, of course, knew of Jackie through recordings. When I was in college, started buying the records and stuff. And just digging Jackie like the rest of us, and loving his sound and loving his thing.
Hmm.
And Nat Reeves, of course, great bassist Nat Reeves. Nat is also from Virginia,
Hmm.
and Nat and I knew each other. And Nat told J Mac about me just before my move to New York. So in 1987, right after I moved here, it was my first trip to Mount Fuji, Japan, the Mount Fuji Jazz Festival, because the Blue Note label had just relaunched, and of course all of the great ones were going to be at the festival, man. Jackie Mack and Herbie and all these.
Hmm.
So here I am, fresh young blood, and I go to the airport. I'm checking in, and I see Jackie Mack checking in, over there. I'm like, oh man, I gotta go say something. I said, excuse me, Mr. McLean, Steve Wilson, Nat Reeves, he said, oh yeah, young blood, I heard about you. Yeah, man. Yeah, hey man, keep doing it. You're doing the right thing, young blood. Keep doing what you're doing. But just remember one thing: the new music is behind us. And then he walked off. And I stood there like a deer in the headlights, man, like I turned to stone.
Oh,
and
wow.
and it took me about 3 years to process what he was saying to me. And he was basically saying, man, I hear where you're trying to go, but you need to go back first, because we've been there. We covered that. So to understand when you're going, you need to understand where we've been. And
Wow.
so go back and listen to those records, like, Quadrangle, from 1959. I'm like, man, J Mac was charting new territory. So I fully got what he was saying to me at the time, but we stayed acquaintances throughout the years, and I, saw him in Hartford a couple of times, and I always went to see him at the Vanguard. And he
Mm.
was and he and his wife Dolly, man, were always so supportive of what I was doing and of the young musicians, because of course they raised a lot of great young musicians up there, and the list is long. So I really appreciate Jackie Mack, man. That's still one of my favorites of all time.
Mine too, man. Next name, Cannonball Adderley.
Another favorite, and another great inspiration. And I was lucky enough to see him live. As a matter of fact, I saw the Country Preacher Band, because I think it was Zavano's last year, the band. Of course, I didn't know that then when I saw it, but I saw the band with Roy McCurdy, Zavano, and
Wow.
Walter Booker, and of course, Cannon.
You
And
must have been
Nat.
like 7 or 8 years old, Steve.
I,
What?
I was I was about, I think, 9 or something like that. Yeah.
Wow.
So and they were on the same weekend, I think, as Rasan, and so seeing those guys, man, and Cannon has such a great presence and energy. And I listened to that Cannonball, that Country Preacher record every day, man. Like I come home from school and put it on,
Yeah.
and there'd been Operation Push with Jesse Jackson, and it felt like you were there in the audience.
Uh-huh.
So by the time I started playing, a few years later, I started trying to emulate and learn those tunes. So, but another one, man, Cannonball, huge impact, one of the greatest.
Yeah. Next name, John Coltrane.
Again, one of the greatest, and I think, like for most of us, like a real guide spiritually on the spiritual side of the music. And he's someone that I didn't really get to until probably I was like 19 or 20. And I remember being 15, 16. As a matter of fact, another quick Wooten Brothers story connected
Sure,
with
yeah.
Train. So on one of those trips I would take to Billy Drummond's house and hanging at the Wooten Brothers. Now, one of the brothers was Rudy Wooten, who passed away a few years ago. He was the great saxophonist in the band.
Yeah.
And Rudy was so gifted, man, incredibly gifted. And I mean, as a teenager, he was playing C melody and alto at the same time in harmony, playing
Mm.
lines and stuff, just incredible. So I remember going up there and all of those guys are aside from being very musical and talented, super intellectuals. And so I learned a lot from those guys. And I remember talking to Rudy about Train one time, and Rudy was learning giant steps in harmony. I'm like, holy, you know. So, and we were just talking about Train. And so I went and bought the Coltrane record, Giant Steps. And man, it was too heavy for me when I first bought it. And so going back full circle again to Gary Bartz had a record called Love Affair from 1977 on Capitol. And he had a beautiful samba version of Giant Steps. And I was like, oh my God, now I can really hear this tune. And I transcribed Gary's solo note for note, man. I memorized the whole thing. And then I went back to Train. So I kind of got through Train sort of, circuitously. But when I got there, man, I felt like I was ready for it. And I started transcribing a lot of Train, and it just became a huge impact on me.
Beautiful. Next name, Sonny Rollins.
Another one. Sonny, someone I've come to appreciate even more so, I think, in the last 10 years. And to me, Sonny, I equate Sonny uh, with Louis Armstrong
Mm.
in terms of the pure genius quotient. And what I mean by that is that, in particular, Sonny. Sonny is like he plays completely in the moment. And Sonny Rollins when you hear him, the nuke isms as we call them, his
Right.
sound, his phrases. But, unlike say Charlie Parker Train, he didn't really develop like even what has become almost a codified language, because those guys developed a language, which is an incredible feat of itself, because obviously that their language changed modern music.
Mm.
But Nuke, just incredible imagination in the moment, just this complete spontaneity. And of course, yeah, you could pick out certain things that he would do, but and then of course his evolution as an artist, when you follow stuff he did with Miles, then the stuff with Max, then his Ornette period where he was
I think
very
you
influenced by Ornette.
froze.
Oh, I think we're frozen. Uh-oh. We're both frozen. Can you hear me? Uh-oh. Did the sign back on? Oh no. Still working. I'm gonna Oh, we're back. You there? Oh, hold on. I I'm unable to.
There we go. Yeah,
Oh,
something had
okay.
happened. You went out. I don't know what happened. You
Yeah.
froze.
Yeah,
And
you
then,
frozen that in. Okay.
right. But you were
But
talking about Coltrane. Please pick that up.
yeah, yeah. Did you hear me about? Did you hear all the Train stuff or Sonny
Uh,
Rollins?
no, excuse me. I'm sorry. Sonny Rollins is where we
Yeah.
start. You just talked about how Nuke was like how he improvised. He was always in the moment.
Yes. Yeah. Nuke's. I mean, just his invention in the moment is just uncanny, and it's incredible. And his command of time, his sense of swing is so
Yeah.
strong. It's so percussive. But his evolution as an artist, as a player, as an improviser, you think about the stuff with Monk, with Miles,
Yeah.
with Max,
And
then
Bud Powell too.
and Bud Powell, and then the period where he's influenced by Ornette Coleman,
Mm.
and then the stuff he was doing in the early 60s, the bridge. So he just kept evolving all the time, and you can't really put it to like, well, here's Nuke and his language. Here's what he would do. You can't boil it down to that. because it's much bigger than that.
Yeah,
I mean, you
yeah,
can get nuke isms and nuke sounds and phrases and some of the phrasing, but you can't boil it down to, like the way we do Charlie Parker or even Coltrane.
yeah, yeah. Next name, Wayne Shorter.
Another main inspiration, and not just as a saxophonist, but as a composer and as a visionary. And Wayne, I've been heavily influenced by Wayne, and I've gotten to see him many times since the '80s. With the various groups he's had, and actually his record that he did in '85, Atlantis.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
that had a huge impact on me, and that was one of my inspirations for moving to New York. So I just think he's just one of the great visionaries we've ever had, and not just in music, but in art, period, and one of the great humanitarians. Man. So it's incredible.
Without question. We got one more for you. Albert Eiler.
Wow. Now, there's someone that I really want to check out more. And I've just only start to really appreciate him in, say, the last 10 or 15 years.
Mm.
And I've actually played a couple of his tunes, but another one of our dearly departed friends that was really into Albert Eiler, and speaking of Frank Kimbrough, the pianist.
Mm.
And Frank and I played in Maria Schneider's orchestra for many years. Frank left us too soon in December, and he started getting me into some Albert Eiler. So he's another one that I'm going to start checking out more. And I remember being on a plane one time with Gary Peacock.
Oh yeah,
Um,
bassist. Yeah.
yeah, who had played with Albert Eiler, and he told me some Albert stories. Um, but I really want to check him out a lot more because I know he's first of all, he had a whole other side of the music and a whole other language,
Yeah.
and had a huge impact on the music at that time. So I really want to check him out a lot more.
Well, talk about impact, Steve. You've had an impact too, man. And like I said, all the music that you've played over the years, all the artists that you work with, and it's just been an honor and a pleasure, man, just to sit here and talk to you about your career and everything that entails. Hang on, I'm about to close out the show.
Okay.
You've heard it from the great Steve Wilson. And as the saying goes, if the music grooves and makes you move, it must be jazz. I'm Preston Williams with Jazz Talk signing off. Peace.